Alright, so good evening, and my name is Andrew Witt, and welcome to UC Merced's debates between the Young Democrats and College Republicans. Today we've got several topics to debate about, and all the debaters are here to educate you on the different platforms many citizens stand by. Now, the candidates have spent a long time thoroughly figuring out three very controversial questions to debate. And we've got fiscal policy, security, and healthcare. First, I would like to say that if you are highly interested in these heated discussions, you should seriously consider joining the Young Democrats and or the College Republicans. Both organizations discuss politics, policy, and strive to give you the kind of expertise you'll see tonight. Second, I'd like to thank all of the people who were involved in this effort. The Commission on Education Awareness, a subunit under UCM for helping spearhead this debate, debaters from the Young Democrats and the College Republicans for dedicating this evening to debate, Sandra Soares for getting the food, Josh Mason, Jose Hercules, and Michael Lomio for sorting out the questions, and of course, Reach Authentic Media for videoing this event, and you, the audience, for your forthright presence tonight. Without all of you, this event could not have been possible. Thank you all. And with that out of the way, it's my pleasure to introduce to you tonight's moderator. Our moderator is Ivan Flores, Internal Vice President of the Associated Students of UC Merced. He is a third year majoring in political science and minoring in economics. And he requested my introduction of him to be brief. So please welcome Ivan Flores.
Hey everyone, I hope everyone is doing well tonight. So as Andrew said, my name is Ivan Flores and I am the current UCM Internal Vice President. And one of my jobs is to moderate discussions on the Senate table. And I moderated a mayor debate between Noah Lohr and Stan Thurston. So let me go a little bit about the format for tonight. So each team will have 3 minutes. We'll have affirmative and negative and cross-examination. So the first question will be, Congress should renew the federal assault weapons ban, but before it begins, I would like each member from each team to introduce themselves. So we'll start with, on our right, with the College Republicans. If you can please introduce yourself.
All right. Hello everyone, my name is Merced Lewis. I am a fourth year senior political science major. I've been with the College Republicans since I was a freshman. So I've been here quite a long time. So that's basically my spiel.
Hello everybody, my name is Zachary Mondo. I'm the president of the College Republicans. I'm a second year mechanical engineering major.
Hello everyone, I'm Baltazar Cornejo. I am a fifth year political science major, and I've been with Republicans since my sophomore year. And I'm former president as well as Maurice. So.
Oh, thanks, Bill.
Good evening, everyone. I'm Joshua Mason, so that's double major, political science and sociology, second year. And my involvement with the Democrats Club has ranged only through this year. So I'm excited to be a new member.
Hello, I'm Josh Anderson, second year poli-sci major, and I've been with the Democrats Club since my freshman year, and I'm currently the recruitment chair.
Hello everyone, my name is Tristan Jones. I'm also a second year political science major, and I've also been with the Democrats Club for 2 years now, on and off. Looking forward to it.
Thank you, both teams. So we will now begin tonight's debate. So our first question is, Congress should renew the federal assault weapons ban. Mass shootings in Sandy Hook, Newton, Aurora, and Tucson have demonstrated all too clearly the need to regulate military-style assault weapons and high-capacity ammunition magazines. On January 24th, Senator Feinstein introduced the Assault Weapon Ban of 2013, a bill to stop the sale, transfer, importation, and manufacturing of military-style assault weapons and high-capacity ammunition feeding devices. President Obama has also said that he'd support a federal ban, but how much would this legislation do? Back in 1994, Congress passed a federal assault weapons ban that lasted 10 years. Experts who have studied the law tend to agree that it was rife with loopholes and generally ineffective at curbing gun violence. Though it might well have reduced mass shootings, the amendment to reestablish a federal ban on certain assault weapons was defeated. In 62 mass shootings over the last 3 decades, more than half of mass shooters used assault weapons with high-capacity magazines. So we'll begin with our first individual, and you have 3 minutes.
Hello. Our first argument is that a lack of policy to control assault weapons has harmed the U.S. and others in the last decade. As was stated, with the recent and tragic mass shootings that have taken place within the last few years, people have begun to question whether or not the existence of a policy to curb the use of assault weapons should still be in effect. When the federal assault weapons ban was previously implemented, it seems difficult to say that it was coincidental that nearly all mass shootings, which took place from 1994 to 2004, were committed with semi-automatic weapons instead of assault weapons as modern shootings are today. But let's just say in the hypothetical situation that it was purely coincidental. We still would question how exactly the existence of this policy has actually harmed any citizen of the United States. Other than drastically overplayed emphasis on your right to bear arms, there simply is no net impact that the American people experience by having a policy in play that attempts to curb violence committed with assault weapons. Also consider that criminals use the current procedures to easily attain assault weapons to their advantage. The Washington Post reported on November 13, 2009, that Mexican officials want to ban assault weapons in America, saying that 90% of the guns seized in drug crimes in Mexico originate in the United States, including most assault rifles. Our lack of effort to address this problem conversely fuels the drug war we spend millions on yearly. Our second argument is that the federal assault weapons ban was largely effective in achieving its policy goals. While critics of the assault weapons ban will argue that there was simply not enough time to assess the long-term efficacy of the policy, the short-term statistics on crime linked to assault weapons is more than suggestive. Brad Plumer of the Washington Post reported that the number of mass shootings per year has doubled since the ban expired. That fact alone is indicative that the ban was effective in curbing mass shootings. Beyond just the increase in the amount of mass shootings, John Rosenthal of the Huffington Post argues that it's important to note that the amount of crimes linked to assault weapons from 1994 to 2004 decreased by 70%. Given that crimes linked to assault weapons account for around 6% of all gun violence, that curb was substantial enough in the short term to greatly curb the capacities that gang members and mass murderers carry. It is hardly coincidental that the 3 largest shootings that have occurred since the ban has been lifted, Aurora, Colorado, Sandy Hook Elementary, and Virginia Tech, were all mass killings performed with guns and high-capacity magazines that were previously illegal to obtain under the assault weapons ban. Our third argument is that provisions can be made to the law to close pre-existing loopholes. Just because we're talking about renewal here doesn't mean that the legislative process won't allow for amendments to be made and to close some loopholes that previously had been held. Reoperationalizing our definition of assault weapons to fit the times we live in now is certainly a process that's more than achievable and can cause no negative impact on the American people.
The next presenter will be Mr. Cornejo. And you have 3 minutes.
When one speaks about reinstating the federal assault weapons ban, one must speak about what it truly is. It is a removal of a means of self-defense for the people. I know that my friends on the left will disagree about the need for semi-automatic weapons for self-defense, but it is a means, and it is one rarely used by assailants. English philosopher John Locke, who among some great few had the greatest influence among America's founding generation and its founding documents, stated that self-defense is the most basic of natural rights to man. Locke, like many Enlightenment philosophers, believed that in the state of nature, man is given the right to self-defense. I know, however, that we are not presently in a state of nature. I know that we have created institutions and governments to move away from such a horrendous Hobbesian place. We are, however, in a state of nature when we are in dire need of self-defense, while we wait for the agents of the state to arrive and protect us. The influence of Locke is represented in the Second Amendment of the United States Constitution. From the debates in the ratifying conventions, it is clear that the amendment was added to the Bill of Rights in order to protect citizens from the encroachment of the federal government and the standing army, and for citizens to protect their persons and their property. Through militias, citizens and states would be able to bear arms, and the scope of the Second Amendment was later expanded by the Supreme Court to apply to handguns for individual citizens, in the landmark decision of D.C. v. Heller in 2008. In a more centralized government, where the federalism of our founders has deteriorated, it is not only applicable, but it is also just to expand the scope of the Second Amendment to apply to individuals, not just for handguns, but for semi-automatic weapons. Now I pose a theoretical question for you. If you are in a situation where you need to protect yourself, where you are in dire need, where you are in dire danger of your body being injured, or your family, would you rather have a shotgun or a semi-automatic rifle? How long does it take you to protect yourself, to load up a shotgun compared to a rifle? You know, how many times do you have to pull the trigger with a rifle compared to a semi-automatic weapon? I mean, with a shotgun compared with a semi-automatic weapon. See, getting rid of a means of self-defense gets rid of an opportunity for you to protect your persons and your property. So, for me, this is a question about safety, and it's a question of our traditions. And I ask you to consider that whenever you hear these debates, because it is a means. It's a means for your right to defend yourself and your property, and it is a means for you to be considered a free person. So, thank you.
Thank you, Lo.
Sorry. Okay, so we will now begin with the cross-examination, beginning with the College Republicans. You have 2 minutes.
Is it 2 minutes for each of us?
No, I think it's the whole.
It's back and forth.
So, one of the issues you brought up was the drug war, and that weapons being imported from the U.S. reach Mexico. I do, however, have to argue that that's the main reason for violence in Mexico. I think the main reason is the prohibition of drugs in the first place. So I think that because the U.S. or other countries have prohibited the use of drugs, you then create black markets that, by its nature, create violence. So I would just ask you how to respond to that, because
I'd first respond to that what we presented was not that they were being sold on black markets, but that they were bought legally in the United States and taken to Mexico. So there was no black market involved. And also, what was the other part you said?
well, I was arguing that the crime is happening because of a black market, not the sale of the weapons, but because.
Yeah, but the capability to have access to those weapons is what allows them to commit these crimes.
Yeah, but if the black market of the drug use did not exist, you wouldn't need to shoot someone for your drugs. You would have.
Yeah, we agree on that, but the problem is that the problem isn't about drugs that are legal or not. The problem is about people are dying
Yeah.
and people are getting shot. So we agree on that. I believe that drugs should be legal too.
Yeah.
But the problem is that guns are being sold to Mexicans legally in the U.S. Yeah. So can I ask you a question now?
Yeah, go ahead.
So you brought up your Second Amendment rights. However, do you realize that the weapons that we're debating on were not present when the Second Amendment was written, and also that these weapons were designed specifically by militaries to take down humans in mass numbers?
I do realize that, and I realize that at the time of the Second Amendment was created by the citizens to be able to protect themselves against a standing army. So how would a handgun protect you against a standing army in the present time? So,
Okay, well, we don't let people just have rocket launchers in the streets.
No.
We're not going to give people the same sort of military capacity.
Okay, that's it for cross-examination. Thank you guys. We are now moving on to our second question.
Second speaker.
Second speaker.
Hello, everyone again. All right, I'll just be beginning by addressing the arguments that our opponents made, and then I'll move on to recrystallizing our own. I heard Balthazar largely mention the Constitution and your right to bear arms as a crux of his case. He says that you should have the right to defend yourself as an individual, and the rights that are enumerated through the Constitution and Lockean philosophy are things that would dictate such. However, if our opponents are actually familiar with Lockean philosophy, they would understand that the social contract theory actually enumerates how rights are specified. And in the Lockean and Rousseauian social contract theory, it says that you possess rights as an individual. You have the right to carry that gun. But once your right to carry that gun infringes upon the rights of other people, then you question that right. And that's the crux of our case today. The point that we make with all of this data is that these weapons are only used, and many politicians come to a consensus on this fact, that these weapons are only used to fuel things such as mass killings and gang violence. And that's the reason why we stand against this. So if you look at the core foundational philosophies on which they base most of their arguments, you can see that they're actually contradicting themselves, because Locke says something completely contrary to that. Yes, you have the right to defend yourself. Yes, during the time in which the Second Amendment was created, you were supposed to defend yourself against a standing army. But, as Josh mentioned in his cross-examination, I could use a rocket launcher to defend myself against a standing army, but it's not legal. I could use a sniper rifle to do the same thing, but it's not legal. And the capacities that these guns carry are only used for violence. Now, moving on to recrystallize on my own arguments. The main attack that they made against us, at least within the cross-examination, is that the drug war is the only thing that creates this violence and fuels it. However, in the stance in which he's taking, I'm assuming they're taking a libertarian stance here, the ideal world in which they want the drug war to not exist will never exist. The drug war will be there, and it always will, regardless of whether or not they want it to be. And so, we want to curb the amount of violence that these people can actually commit with these assault weapons, because we've proven that, in fact, a large majority of the guns that come through Mexico are bought legally within the United States. People who aren't even actually citizens sometimes can come here, buy guns, and then take them back and commit massive amounts of crime. That's not right, that's not ethically just, and we will not stand for any policies such as that. Now, recrystallizing on our first argument is that the lack of policy here is what's actually going to harm people, not having the policy in play. Trying to curb gun violence, which is something that's nationally recognized as a serious problem, is not, shall not, and will not ever be a problem. We're trying to curb violence here. Everyone acknowledges it's a problem. And so, for them to say that your right to bear arms should be more important than the right to curb violence and the right of public safety, that's ludicrous. Absolutely ludicrous. Moving on to our second argument, it's effective. We gave large amounts of data to show you that not only in the short-term period that the ban was in place, but also, hopefully, if it was in place again, it would be effective in curbing these bans. Thank you very much.
Hello. Now, you've heard a lot of arguments today about, I guess, Lockean theory. Now, I'm an engineer. I don't really deal with that. I'm going to deal with facts up here right now. So, we did hear that, firstly, sniper rifles are illegal. I own a sniper rifle, actually. It was perfectly legal. It's a Remington 700. It's an awesome hunting gun. Because that is what many of these weapons are actually built for as well. Hunting, which is a right of many Americans. Assault rifles are also able to be used by private citizens to hunt. Now, when it comes to this actual legislation, reinstating this legislation, it doesn't actually solve the problems. You're trying to stop people from legally purchasing weapons and you're trying to use that as a way to stop people from illegally obtaining them in a different country. Now, those rifles aren't being bought by legal U.S. citizens; they're being sold to Mexico necessarily. What's happened? They're being bought on illegal black markets. They're not being substantiated or supported, except for, I guess, in the Fast and Furious thing that happened last year. If you want to talk about that. Because that's when the federal government was actually doing that, not private citizens. Now, when it comes to those facts I was talking about, how about that the murder rate has actually dropped since the assault weapons ban has expired? How about that even though the AR-15 is the most popular gun in the country and was used in the Newtown massacre, that rifles like that only count for less than 3% of the murders in the United States? How about that actually that the majority of homicides, or over 500,000 of them in the United States, but only 0.1% of them are committed by rifles like of this nature? Well, you're not actually solving the problem getting rid of these assault rifles. Because it's handguns, it's baseball bats, it's normal weapons that other people have that are actually causing these problems. It's not assault rifles for the most part. So we're asking that you don't infringe on my right to purchase this kind of gun. We're asking that you don't infringe on the people's rights to defend themselves. Because Baltzar is right when he brought up the actual times that the time it takes to actually load one of these weapons and use it in a situation. Now you're right. They are used to commit a lot of damage against a person who's trying to attack you. Now, when it comes down to it, an AR-15 fires at 700 rounds per minute. You can hold off a bad guy for a pretty long time because it takes, what, Merced PD about 3 minutes to respond to a crime. Your handgun has 10 rounds in the magazine, 1 in the chamber if you know what you're doing. An assault rifle, a lot of them have easy conversion kits, got a 30-round magazine. Hold yourself off a lot longer like that. And they're meant to minimize collateral damage and maximize damage to actual target. Now, when it comes to the actual massacres themselves, yes, they're absolutely deplorable. They are not what we ever wanted. But at the same time, getting rid of this legislation, putting this legislation in place will not solve that problem. Because the people that are doing this are either deranged or obtained their weapons illegally and took them, very likely in the case of the Newtown one, from someone who legally obtained their weapons. So we need to actually address the problems here. People need to get into proper mental health checks. They don't ever obtain these rifles, or so that they're actually not able to commit these massacres in the first place. Because getting these guns will not stop this. People will still find a way to get them illegally and commit these massacres. So let's allow people to defend themselves with their own choice weapon, and not take away the right of a family to have their own choice in determining how they will defend themselves. Thank you.
Okay, so we'll begin with the cross-examination now, and we're beginning with the College Republicans. You guys have 2 minutes. Mr. Munder?
All right. So again, I'll hit on that point. How does this actually stop people from illegally attaining weapons? Because all you're going to be doing is keeping people from legally attaining them. You're going to criminalize people who want to buy rifles for their own personal
Well, we
use.
have 3 responses for this. One is the fact that you're saying that we're supporting the black market, but the fact is the availability of the black market to the average human being is just not, it's just not as available. You can't go down the street to the black market and just go pick up an assault rifle. That's common sense. 2 is the fact that, oh, sorry, let me think. Just had it in my head. So it's common sense there, but also the fact of the matter is that the black market is a deterrent in and of itself for people to buy these things because they're significantly more expensive. On top of that, I have this. Anyways, there's my response for you in and of itself right there. Okay, I wanted to ask you. You said that gun violence committed with these assault weapons accounts for only 3% in the U.S. But are you aware of the fact that mass murderers, all of those mass murderings that have happened, have accounted for 50% used with assault rifles?
I am aware, and that's because that the proper tools weren't in place to keep them from getting their hands on those weapons in the first place. They, for the most part, either did not obtain their weapons legally, or they were mentally ill and should never have had those weapons in the first place. And I don't believe that this legislation properly addresses that.
So going off of that point, you're saying that these people didn't even obtain them legally. We actually specified within our speech an actual substantiation that says that the Mexican drug cartels obtain these things legally within the United States. The evidence says that. So that's directly contrary to what you're saying, just so you're aware.
Which evidence is that?
It's the evidence that we gave from the Washington Post, November 13, 2009. It articulated the point that people come over here and they get either their family members or they can legally obtain these weapons and then commit collateral damage as such in the Mexican drug cartels.
Okay, thank you. I think it's time. Our next debater would be Mr. Jones.
All right. Hello, everyone. All right, so I'm going to address some of the cases that you brought up here. There was a lot of talk about Second Amendment rights for self-defense. And I would just like to pose the question of how often people have to defend themselves against small armies. Now, I like to think that that's not very often unless you're a criminal. But then again, I come from a rural area. I don't have to put up with whole gangs assaulting my house and me having to solo fight them off, Rambo style. So, that could be a thing that happens. And if it does, that's cool. That's very movie-like. But, for example, a shotgun isn't covered by the assault weapons ban, so you can fend them off with a shotgun. And one of you gentlemen asked, would you rather have an assault rifle, which takes skill to aim and fires out an absurd amount of bullets, which will hit your beautiful house, or would you rather use a shotgun, which it's much easier to hit with? And frankly, I think most people, if they're actually trying to defend themselves against a home invasion, which isn't going to be an army, it's going to be like 1, 2 people, maybe 3 if you're like rich or something, you're going to want to use a shotgun, because you can actually hit someone with that, and you'll bring them down, and you probably won't be brought up for murder charges, even in a country that doesn't allow, home defense. So yeah, I'd rather have a shotgun than an assault rifle, because I don't know how to shoot an assault rifle. Shotgun, point and click. So that's one case. Second of all, one of you brought up baseball bats. Like mass murderings occur with baseball bats on a regular basis. I don't know how you can compare assault weapons, fully automatic assault weapons, which by the way, presidents from Carter all the way to Reagan said that the average citizen should not possess, can be compared to a baseball bat. You can't enter a theater and kill, dozens of people with a baseball bat, So that's really kind of a false comparison. You also said that mental health should be the real concern, and that's really a red herring, because that's what's brought up every time by the opposition. When some sort of gun control is proposed, and Democrats or just rational people in general try to get it passed through Congress, then the opposition says, well, that won't solve the entire problem. Not every murder is going to be stopped by this legislation, so we can't let it pass. Well, that's not how you make improvements. You make improvements a piece at a time, doing what you can do when you can do it. Saying that we need to address mental health and these other issues before we can get dangerous weapons off the street that are built for killing other people is just delaying things and ultimately assisting criminals. So I just don't believe that those are good arguments. Now, essentially what we're arguing is that this ban, which was in place for 10 years, needs to be brought back. And it can be changed through the legislative process, loopholes can be addressed, but it needs to be brought back so that we can curb these events. Because all these mass shootings we've had recently, we're using things that were previously banned, And now, my opponents over here said that many of these things were obtained legally, they were obtained by the individuals from someone else who got them legally. Well, the point is, that other person got them legally. They shouldn't have been able to get them legally. These weapons should not be legal.
Thank you, Mr. Jones. Our next individual is Mr. Lewis.
So with Balthasar talking about the theory behind gun rights and Mondo giving the statistics, I'm going to kind of talk about the culture that's revolving around this issue. The Democrats always come up and bring gun control legislation only when a mass shooting happens, when we're all afraid, when people have been killed, and it's really sad to see, especially when it's school children. And I don't think school children being killed should be used for political points. That's not okay. The fact that they have to do that every time this happens and invoke and use our fear as a means to push their own agenda, whatever it is that may be, is just ludicrous. We have the facts on our side. We know for a fact that violence in general, gun violence, has been on a downward trend long before the assault weapons ban, and even with the assault weapons ban not in place, it's still continuing. The reason that is because we as a culture are becoming more peaceful. And I think that we can trust ourselves to become a more peaceful society. Now with the mass shootings, they obviously have invoked these shootings, the Newton shooting and all these other shootings that have happened. Now, let me just pose this. When it comes to the news, what are they going to show? The mass shootings or the people defending themselves? The people who are defending their property and their family? They're always going to show the mass shootings because that's the thing that makes us respond the most. That's what makes us tune in to CNN. And you know what? I wish it wasn't like that because that's what encourages people to go on more mass shootings. So that's what I'm trying to push on here, is that this culture of fear needs to stop and it's getting in the way of the facts. The facts that assault weapons, that the amount of people who, 99.9% of assault weapon owners are not committing mass shootings. Oh, well over that. And the fact that you feel like, oh, just because this small minority of people who are generally mentally deranged, or people who are involved in the drug business, which is completely illegal in itself, are somehow reason to prevent law-abiding citizens from owning these weapons, who are doing the right things, who are being safe, who are acting in a proper manner. What is this? So the thing I want to point out is this isn't about small armies. This isn't about drug cartels. This is about our right to defend ourselves, to defend our property, and to defend our family. And I think trying to use mass shootings, killings of people as a way to gain political points is unacceptable. And I think that we need to stand for what works. And what works is the type of system that's already in place. So that's all I have to say.
Thank you, Mr. Lewis. We will now move into cross-examination.
Grand Cross, right?
Grand Cross.
You guys can begin.
Okay, so I think, so we talked about the idea of, with semi-assault weapons, we were discussing the efficacy of them, and that you'd prefer a shotgun, which is your own opinion, you're not exactly a gun expert. But anyways, when it comes to semi-assault weapons, I think that the usability is far greater just because the way it's used, the way that you can reload is far more efficient. But when it comes down to it, I just want to know, when it comes to defending your property, isn't it not true that you would like to have a weapon to defend yourself? When you are dealing with an assailant, of course you want to have a weapon to defend your
Of
family.
course, absolutely. But the thing you have to acknowledge here too is that semi-automatic weapons such as the AR-15, the Bushmaster assault rifle, the AK-47, all have little tiny pins inside of them that can be very easily manipulated to become fully automatic weapons. And the thing we're trying to point out here is that the utility value of these weapons is so much more dangerous than a shotgun or a pistol or anything like that. That people can defend their homes with a shotgun. They can do it with a pistol. And another point we wanted to make too here is that you haven't been able to quantify the amount of times that people defend their homes with semi-automatic assault rifles. We argue that it in fact is more often occurs with pistols and shotguns and things of that sort. You haven't been able to quantify that statistic, so I feel as if you making that claim is a little bit...
May I ask a question?
Yeah.
I would like to know, first of all, since you argued that when mass shootings happen, that's not the time to talk about how to solve mass shootings. When is the time to talk about how to stop mass shootings from happening?
We're saying
when
don't
is the time?
politicize mass shootings for your own gain in order to push your own legislation. It's a topic that we can have at any time, but don't just push it only when these shootings occur, only when it's convenient.
These shootings occur every day.
Yeah,
People
we're not-
die every day.
They
How
do,
can we
but they
talk
don't
about
die
it
every day by
time?
assault rifles. It's a rare occurrence.
And
And
then
above that,
situation-
these assault rifles are excellent for
Did
defending
it ever
yourself.
occur to you that the main purpose of government is to respond to problems within its country? So of course, when mass shooting
And it is
happens,
the
we're going
government's
to
responsibility to
respond.
protect
Our
you.
only political agenda is to protect our citizens.
What point should dead children make?
Discussion? Okay, so thank you both teams. I wish I had my gavel. I have a gavel, but I didn't. So, yeah, I did. Okay, so we are now moving on to our second question. So the second question has to do with...
30?
No.
Oh, okay.
Wait, yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, you guys can do it. Minute. Oh, wait. A minute 30, final statement.
Okay. Just briefly before I begin, I'm just going to be going over what I think this round has come down to. All right. To highlight what Tristan and Josh were just talking about, the point we want to make here is that at what point do we assess these things as political statements or not political statements? In this hypothetical situation where we are actually representatives of you, the people, should we not respond to problems? I'm not saying that dead children are a political statement. I'm saying they're a statement about safety. It's a statement about what we should be doing with our gun policies. And the fact of the matter remains, although they will get up here and tell you, I'm sure, in their next speech, that these are things that you use for self-defense, etc. The point is, these guns can be very easily manipulated to cause large amounts of killing, and not just that, but you have to consider, since this ban has been lifted, I feel like the whole point of this debate has kind of centered away from the ban itself and just gun control as a whole, but since this ban has been lifted, we've seen 3 of the worst incidents in all of American history for mass killings. Aurora, Sandy Hook, and Virginia Tech. All things that were committed with things that were previously considered banned. And so for them to sit here and tell you that these are things that are solely used for self-defense when they haven't even quantified the amount of people that actually use these things for self-defense. I mean, they haven't even given one anecdote of someone defending their house with a semi or a fully automatic weapon. So with that, I just wanted to say that we're here to protect you, the people. We are not here to deny your rights, because honestly, that right doesn't exist once you take the public safety away. Thank you.
Do you all know which guns were used in the Virginia Tech massacre? It was a Glock 9mm and a Walther 22. Those are pistols. Those are legal guns to purchase. I know someone with a Glock 9mm. I shot one over my winter vacation. I'm telling you, the majority of the violent crimes committed are done with pistols. They're done with shotguns. Assault rifles, yes, can be accountable for mass shootings, but even the ones in Newtown were divided with a semi-automatic weapon, not an automatic weapon. Manipulation of the rifle is not the issue here. The issue is allowing people to defend themselves with the way they see fit, to defend their families, to defend their properties. And in the end, assault rifles are only as dangerous as the hands you put them in. The majority of people own them. I live with people that own them. They're safe, completely. There's a gun culture all around how safe these guns are. It's when you give them to people who are deranged, who are lunatics, who have these self-aggrandized, these really terrible ideas about themselves, because they see on TV, they get famous over these kinds of shootings. Those are the people that are committing those mass shootings. And when it comes down to it, The Second Amendment governs,
Second.
the Second Amendment specifically governs your right to bear arms and militias. When it comes down to it, I do believe that the states have the right to regulate this, because our state already heavily regulates this. California has rules over the type of grips you can use, over the type of magazine you can use, over calibers, over the type of materials you can use, trigger pressures, all sorts of stuff like that. The states have already had this covered, and they've done a good job of it. Because right now, crimes are down, and people can use these to defend themselves in a manner that best suits them. They are safer because of these. The majority of citizens, the vast majority, are safer because of assault rifles.
Now we are on to our second question. Second question having to do with healthcare. So, the Affordable Care Act is a necessary addition to the United States healthcare model. The Affordable Care Act, also known as the healthcare law, was created to expand access to affordable health coverage to all Americans, lower costs, and improve quality and care coordination. Under the healthcare law, people will A, have health coverage that meets a minimum standard called minimum essential coverage by January 1st, 2014. And B, qualify for an exemption or pay a fee when filing their taxes if they have affordable options but remain uninsured. Opponents of the law say that it will harm the economy, add to the deficit, and cause the price of healthcare to rise rather than fall. Supporters argue that the law greatly expands access to healthcare and will over time lower government spending while boosting the economy. Should Congress repeal the Affordable Care Act? Again with affirmative.
To be clear, we're arguing the affirmative that the Affordable Care Act is a necessary addition to the United States healthcare model. Alright, our first argument is that it is critical that the United States make steps towards prioritizing the prevention of illness rather than simply its treatment, and the Affordable Care Act does this. The World Health Organization, in its latest ranking of international healthcare efficiency, ranked the United States 37th in the world for its proficiency in healthcare. A more recent assessment by Bloomberg Data has the United States ranked number 46 out of 55, and also says that the United States spends 17.1% of its annual GDP on healthcare, which is the most in the world. This is largely because the United States subsidizes a system that values the treatment of illness over its prevention. Companies can make a lot more profit through expensive surgeries than providing cheap basic care. Compounding this problem is that so many uninsured poor Americans are forced to neglect their own health to put their kids through school and make ends meet. And the only time they have access to our medical system is when they end up in the emergency room on the brink of death, a tragedy which drives costs up for all of us. The Affordable Care Act takes steps to solve these problems. With this policy, more than 5 million Americans have already gotten health insurance coverage that could very well save their lives. Furthermore, the ACA is designed to incentivize preventive care at all levels and reward healthy habits. With support at the state level, adequate funding, and effective implementation, it should do a lot to rein in costs and overhaul our healthcare system into a more efficient, sustainable, and ethical system in which all Americans are cared for. Our second argument is that the ACA bridges the gap in treatment that minorities receive, people with pre-existing conditions, and the impoverished receive. Implicit within its title, the Affordable Care Act makes coverage a possibility for those who previously could not afford it. It is a commonly known fact that medical insurance providers used to be able to arbitrarily deny coverage to someone based upon their pre-existing conditions. The fact that provisions in the ACA outlaw this discrimination is the biggest ethical step forward the United States has ever made in the history of its healthcare system. Beyond that, healthcare.gov notes that the Latino population in the United States has more than 1/4 of its people uninsured, making them the most disproportionately uninsured minority in the United States. Black Americans are also 58% more likely than white Americans to lack coverage. Reducing this inequality is an ethical imperative, and it ensures that hospitals in minority communities, which are overburdened, can afford to remain open, and that no child will die of preventable causes because that child had the ill luck to be born in a poor neighborhood. It's estimated that between 22,000 and 55,000 Americans died every year before this act passed because of their lack of health care. These are people who could have been saved, who could even now be contributing to their economies, to their communities, and to their families, but who have been stolen away by an unfair system. The Affordable Care Act is saving lives. It will continue to save lives for as long as the Republicans allow it.
Our next debater will be Mr. Cornejo.
Right.
So, we are pro healthcare. We agree that everyone should be covered. We agree that everyone should have healthcare. We're not against healthcare. What we are against is policies that are going to make things worse. Now, there's 40 million uninsured Americans. That's a horrible number. In any developed country, that's a horrible number. And we are ranked 37th in the world. I have that same stat on my notes, which is a horrible stat. That has to do with the type of healthcare we have here, and you know our healthcare lacks a lot of. Our healthcare has a lot of problems, but it also has some good things. So before I answer the question about whether the ACA is a necessary addition to the U.S. healthcare model, I must first give context of what that model is. The U.S. healthcare model has been dubbed an accident of history. The U.S. model is one of mixed government-provided healthcare through Medi-Cal, Medicaid, Medicare, individual private plans, and employer-based health insurance. Although it is true that the U.S. ranks 37th in many surveys about the effectiveness of our healthcare model, there are some benefits our model provides. We are, however, one of the most innovative healthcare systems in the entire world. People come here for breakthrough technologies, things like the MRI and things such as that come here for us. They come here because in their countries, such as Canada and Britain, waiting times are huge. There's so much demand and not enough supply. So that survey, the 37%, the first thing to mention is that the rankings ignore the more unhealthy lifestyles of the American public. From smoking tobacco to our eating habits, which again are pushed through government subsidies of corn syrup, which we all know is all our food. So, but we are not here to defend those problems. Now, one of the reasons that wages have stagnated in recent decades is because compensation packages have shifted to include healthcare from employers. Unions and employers have voluntarily negotiated in order to include these healthcare packages because consumers or workers like that. The ACA will have detrimental impacts on employer-provided healthcare, which includes some of the best healthcare plans that workers in our country have. Things like the Cadillac tax that will come into effect in 2018 will tax these great healthcare plans that many blue-collar workers have, and it will tax them for having great healthcare. So this is a quote from two union leaders in January 27th sent to Pelosi, Terry O'Sullivan from the Laborers International Union. We have examined various healthcare exchanges, and should members be forced to purchase insurance on an exchange, their out-of-pocket costs are likely to be significant, reaching into the thousands of dollars, even if they are eligible for a subsidy under the Act. It would be a sad irony, indeed, if the signature legislative accomplishment of an administration committed to reducing income inequality cut living standards for middle-income and low workers.
Thank you, Mr. Pereira. Our next debater will be...
What questions?
Okay, so we have 2 minutes.
Who gets the first question?
So you mentioned that hospital emergency care accounts for a lot of our rising costs in healthcare.
Yeah.
Do you know the percentage?
No.
3%. 3%.
What's your source?
PolitiFact.
PolitiFact.
Yeah. They have sources. I looked through the government sources. They accounted for 3%.
What about our assertion that preventative care versus care after someone's already in need of surgeries is what's causing rising costs? Or what do you say causes rising costs in our system?
I think the exact same thing you said. I think we should have health care so that we don't have to go to the hospital when we get treated. We should have preventative care.
Okay, great then. So, are you aware that the Affordable Care Act makes provisions so that if a state has its own plan which will cover as many people for as much money or less, that they can implement that plan and get funding from the Affordable Care Act?
Okay.
Are you aware that that's...
Yeah.
All right. And do you have any opposition to that or to the ability of states to make their own plans if they think they'll work better?
I'm not opposed to that. The states created their own plans. That's fine with me. That's what Mitt Romney did in Massachusetts. They created their own plans. What I am against, however, is what I just mentioned. Right? You're going to create a system that's going to help some people. You mentioned lower income people. I'm lower income. My sister doesn't have health care. But for her to get health care, she has to pay a $500 premium, a $2,000 deductible, but yet when she actually goes to the hospital, her out-of-pocket expenses are going to be huge.
30 seconds.
And she called the exchange number, and she couldn't get anything that would actually help her. So out-of-pocket expenses are rising. So, hey, you have healthcare until you get sick. Okay?
15 seconds.
Okay. Are you aware that employer-provided health care has been declining before this act was put in place?
Yeah, it has. It's gonna make it worse.
Through what mechanism?
It's gonna increase tax rates on employer-provided healthcare, like Cadillac plan.
2 seconds.
Can you describe the Cadillac plan
Yeah,
in
that's
2
fine.
seconds?
Okay, so our
Read
next
your law, okay, you'll know what it is.
debater is Mr. Anderson.
Okay, so the fact of the matter here is that Americans need to be covered. It's unacceptable to live in a country that we think of ourselves as one of the best in the world when estimates have it that 22,000 to 55,000 Americans die every year due to lack of coverage. It's unacceptable that we live in a country where people are afraid to go to the hospital because they're not covered. What the Affordable Care Act does is it tries to make health care affordable to more Americans. I find it ironic that a party whose stance in the last question was so strong on safety of the American citizens and security of American citizens is not for this bill that would give American citizens health care and safety and security. Another argument they made, or another argument that I have is that they have not presented a better solution. No one denies that this is a problem in our country, and they have yet to present a better solution. Another thing that they presented is that people are coming from Britain and Canada here to get our health care, and I do not believe that is true. And I would like a source for that as well, because in those countries they have universal health care, and they do not have to worry about any of that. So they are able to cover themselves through the government. Now, back to the main point is that this is covering people who otherwise wouldn't have been covered. That's it. We're saving Americans' lives, and like we said, these Americans who died are now no longer able to contribute to their economies, contribute to their communities, contribute to their families. And like I said, it's unacceptable to live in a country where we're ranked so low. We're ranked so high on other things, but yet on healthcare, we're so far behind, and this is a necessary addition to the U.S. healthcare model. So,
Thank you, Mr. Anderson. Our next debater on College Republicans will be Mr. Mondo.
I'm going to tell you guys a story. My family used to be fairly well off. We're from a good neighborhood. We had great insurance. My dad lost most of what we had in 2008. We owned a lot of property. Values happened to go tumbling. My dad can no longer afford insurance. We moved to my mom's policy. Now, my dad can't afford insurance right now. I just put in my FAFSA something like $14,000 a year, which is less than 1/10 of what he used to make. Now, my dad's going to be making almost nothing, and he's going to be fined for the fact that he makes almost nothing and can't afford insurance. So, what sense does that make at all? My dad's got the fine ready. He has to pay it, but he can't because he doesn't have the money for that. Because we're trying to fine people for not being able to afford insurance. Now, when I got my mom's plan, it was employer-based. But guess what? Obamacare made it so that her company could no longer afford to keep the old policy. It was no longer allowed under the Affordable Care Act. So I had to switch over to a more expensive PPO, one that costs thousands of dollars more per month. So yeah, maybe I didn't go through an exchange. My parents are feeling directly the effect of this policy. They're paying more, or they're being fined because they can't even afford the actual policies themselves. The government may think they can afford it, but they, in reality, cannot actually afford it. So when you want to look at the numbers, we're going to see stuff that this is going to be focusing on getting young people insured. But the problem with getting young people insured is that most of us are getting disproportionately less and less wealthy compared to the older people here. And us young people don't have access to credit. We don't have access to the same kind of assets as older people in our society. They can afford more expensive insurance. We cannot. We would need something like catastrophe insurance. That is now illegal under the Affordable Care Act. We can't get catastrophic insurance. It doesn't happen anymore, which is exactly what young people like us need. So you're now moving the cost to carry an older, aging population with more medical needs, and you're going to put that burden on the younger people in America, us, the people in this room. The costs go to us now. That isn't necessarily fair, because we're the ones that aren't going to need it, because statistically, younger people are less prone to actually getting these diseases. We're less prone to actually getting these things. But I won't argue some of the benefits. I had a pre-existing condition at one point too, and I had to be accepted. And that was great. But you know what? That one benefit does not outweigh the cost of the system becoming more expensive, of doctors now needing to charge more because they're making less money from the system, of the fact that this isn't actually helping make America get any safer. This is actually just making it so that it's more expensive for Americans to actually afford this kind of insurance. So yeah, you can say that we are in favor of safety. We're in favor of financial safety as well as your actual health. Because this is not financially feasible for the majority of Americans. People are losing their policies, people are not able to afford the current policies, and the current policies being offered by the government in the different exchanges don't cover enough. I've read plenty of articles from the Associated Press about families of over 10 people who could only afford a bronze policy, but were forced up into the platinum range for how large their family is. Well, they don't need that kind of coverage. And when they actually go to the hospital for those kinds of things, their out-of-pocket costs balloon, they skyrocket, because they can't afford that kind of care. So yeah, we are in favor of safety. Financial safety in this case, because this plan does not work. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Wanda. We will begin cross-examination with College Republicans.
So you said,
You didn't speak. No, you're in cross-examination.
how do you respond to plenty of plans being canceled because of the Affordable Care Act over the past, since it's been rolled out, but the fact that many people cannot actually now afford to get that insurance again, or that it's now too expensive out of pocket for them?
Okay, so 5 million plans have been canceled because of the Affordable Care Act. Of those 5 million, only 500,000 have still yet to find new plans. So that means 4.5 million of
What was the
those
government's
canceled
goal to
plans-
get by the end of March?
Hmm?
What was the government's goal to get by the end of March to even get enrolled in that program?
Is that your main argument, that it hasn't worked as fast as it could?
I'm saying people don't want it.
How about the 5 million people who have already signed up, though? Do they
They
not
wanted
want it?
7. They're still short. People don't want this policy because it doesn't work. They're only signing up because it's all they can get. It's all that's available to them at this point. Because they no longer have the policies they already had before that.
The reason that the policies before that were canceled is because those policies didn't cover the bare minimum that our government has decided.
I'd say catastrophic insurance is the bare minimum for people my age. I haven't been lucky to be in my parents' policy, but most people that are our age don't really need those extremely high-level policies.
You're right, and that's why this policy allows us to be covered by our parents' insurance until we're 26.
And I won't argue that. That's a good thing. But you know what? People saying are still getting canceled. That's never a good thing. And now they're being forced on the plans that are also inadequate, more inadequate than the plans they had before that.
No, that is not true.
That is true, because you can't get stuff like catastrophic insurance. My plan covered me excellently, and now I can't use it anymore. I have to switch over to a more expensive plan that covers me just as well as the old one.
Okay, well, like I said, of those 5 million people who lost their coverage, 4.5 million have already been able to find new coverage, and there are exemptions for people who cannot afford it. So I don't understand what you said earlier.
4.5 million found it, but what about the rest who haven't?
Those
There's still
500,000, those have exemptions.
Really?
What is your solution then to the problem of Americans dying?
I'm not saying the solution to Americans dying, but we actually need to focus more on actually keeping them healthy, and I don't think the Affordable Care Act focuses on any of that at all. This gets people insurance, but having insurance doesn't make you any healthier.
The problem is that insurance companies capitalize on health of Americans, which is something that we do not.
Okay, yeah, they're businesses. They're trying to capitalize anything they can, like any business should. But you know
Yes,
what?
but
We
the
offer
health
great
of
policies.
Americans is not capitalized on
Time. Thank you. So our next leader will be Mr. Mason.
Okay. Before I begin, I'll just be going over what I feel like this debate is coming down to. Alright, so first, just like to say that Baltazar got up here in his first speech, and he initially agreed that, of course, we want insurance for all Americans. However, it seems to me as if the Republican Party hasn't made any comprehensive federal plan to do that. So until they can actually start providing some alternatives for the problem that is clearly evident within our culture, we're going to try to preference something that's actually on the table. With that said, I'd also like to address the point that Balthazar made in his first speech where he talks about how we are the most innovative healthcare system in the world. Doesn't seem like that's going to change with this system put in place. If anything, it's going to stay the exact same. With having more people insured, that means that you're putting more money into the insurance system. And if companies have more money for insurance, it's likely that they will probably cover more things for you. And so, this brings us back to the core argument we make, is that you have to value prevention over treatment. Balthazar gave us statistics saying that only 3% of all medical procedures account for emergency things. But emergency is different than regular treatments. If I break my arm, that's not considered an emergency. Things like gunshots are considered emergencies. And so if I broke my arm and I went into a medical practitioner to get my arm fixed, I'm going to be out a lot of money for that. So we're still bringing it back to the core argument that you have to value that if we want to stop spending so much on healthcare. Now, with that said, I'd like to bring it back to something that's clearly pretty controversial today, that 5 million plans have been canceled, and that these things are far too expensive for people to afford. It seems as if our opponents aren't actually educated on the exemptions that exist within Obamacare. Because, in fact, if you can provide documentation that you can't afford these things, you're exempt from the whole process. You will not be fined, and thus, there's no reason to assume that these things are going to be too expensive and people are going to be out. Maybe we need to educate people more about the exemptions that exist. With that, I'd also like to talk about the 5 million plans that have been canceled. It seems to me also that, the reason why all of these plans were canceled is because they didn't meet a minimum standard that the government set for healthcare policy. And if the government doesn't deem those things as being adequate, then we can assume that when these people go in to get any coverage with these plans that are inadequate, they will not get the coverage they need. And so, again, this brings us back to the main argument we're making here, is that when we pull people together and we increase the purchasing power of the market, then insurance companies will be able to provide more preventative services for people. And again, this brings us back, we haven't been able to touch much on our contention too, which talks about how the minorities that exist in this country are severely disadvantaged under this healthcare system. 1/4 of Latinos who exist within our economy aren't insured. That's ridiculous. Black people are 58% more likely to be uninsured than a white American. And so the stratification in and of itself with the healthcare policies is just inadequate, and we need to reform. Thank you.
Does anybody have a timer? My eye touched that.
Probably a non-partisan debate.
Sacrifice we remember.
Okay, so we will now begin with the next speaker, Mr. Lewis.
Alright, so I think this debate's kind of gotten a little out of hand. I think the best way to put this is that the Republicans believe that we should all have health care. But just because you believe that we all believe that we should have health care doesn't mean that the ACA is a necessary addition. It's not. Actually, I think we could do a lot better than the ACA. The ACA was overwhelmingly pushed through by Democrats, and for some reason they believe that because the government's setting the standard, that's a good thing. But is the government the one buying these insurance? No, we are. We, the consumers, are buying the insurance. We, the people who are using the insurance, are buying it. And we're the ones using it, not the government. So we should be the ones to set the standards, not the government. Now, when it comes to the healthcare system, I'll agree. The status quo is not good. The reason it's not good is because currently in place we have a lot of oligopolies. We have large firms that are crowding the space, and it makes it really hard for smaller firms or emerging firms, startups, entrepreneurship to occur in the health space. It's one of the many spaces, like education, like many other spaces, that hasn't had enough competition, hasn't had enough innovation in it. And yes, we have had innovation in it, but we could have more. And that's the thing that isn't going to happen if we push through the Affordable Care Act. With the Affordable Care Act in place, it basically promotes a lack of competition. It encourages oligopolies. It makes us have less choice. So I think that if you're trying to figure out how to increase the amount of people who have healthcare, you should increase the amount of choice people have. Being that, you know what, sometimes people can choose not to have healthcare. You know what, I can choose not to have healthcare, because you know what, it's sometimes cheaper to pay out of pocket for me to pay for my eye exams, for my eye care, for whatever it is I need to do. Because you know what, I do research, I do comparisons between doctors. These are the type of things I do as a consumer. Now the opponents are going to say, oh, well, certain people don't have the time or the resources to do these types of things. Yeah, that may be true. So allow competition to exist so that people can pick insurances that better fit them so they don't have to worry about those things. So I think the thing that we need to emphasize is that we need to increase that with this increased demand, we're going to not see a decrease in prices. We're going to see an increase in prices. That's just how markets work, because the supply is not increasing whatsoever. And the amount of free healthcare, that's going to increase the rate for the people who are actually paying, which is us. So I think, just going back to my point, sure, the current healthcare system is not that good, but this addition is going to make it worse. And we're going to see that very soon. So I just want to pose that question to all of you guys, that should the government set the standards for how healthcare work, or should we? I believe the latter. I believe that we should decide how our healthcare works, what we should want on it, and if that's not the case, then you should be fine with what they're proposing.
Thank you, Mr. Lewis. We will now be doing grand cross-examination.
So you do, I have a close question to all three of you. So Obamacare, or the Affordable Care Act, relies on the youth, the ones who won't use healthcare as much, to subsidize the elderly. You do realize, though, however, that the labor force participation rate of the youth in the workforce has dropped dramatically. It's dropping dramatically, it's been dropping for about 2 decades, and it's going to continue to drop. You also do realize that the amount of wealth the youth have, people from the ages of like 45 and under to like 19, the amount of wealth we have is dropping as well. So they relies on a shrinking demographic, a shrinking base of wealth, to fund another demographic which is getting older and it's getting huger because of the baby boomers. That's just not sustainable. It's not. So how would you deal with that? Like, that's the basic of the ACA.
First, I just wanted to point out that it's not entirely dependent upon the youth, it's dependent upon the masses to get insurance. And that's a statistic.
Too broad to say. What do you mean by masses? Break it
The
up.
masses, all the people who don't have insurance, although youth do comprise a large portion of that, it depends not just on the youth, it depends on all those who are uninsured.
Do you know how insurance works though? Insurance works, the people, it's a pool.
Yes, exactly.
Exactly.
And we need to have as many people in that pool as possible
Exactly.
for it to work.
But you
So are
need
you
to-
arguing kicking young people out will suddenly make it cheaper for everyone? Or should young people consist their own pool so that when they get old, they die? Like, what is your
And on that-
alternative to pooling everyone together?
On
There
that,
isn't
if
one.
there are more people in the pool, how does that not promote market competition?
It doesn't
People
promote
have
market
to start-
competition when you have regulations in place that prevent this.
Are you?
Yeah, Maurice, you said that it promotes a lack of competition, but how is that the case when citizens now have access to the marketplace where they can view every different kind of health insurance plan that they want? That promotes competition.
There's only
promotes health insurance
there's only about 12 insurance companies that they are part of the exchanges. You're essentially supporting corporate welfare because you're increasing demand for 12 big corporate insurance companies for people to buy their health insurance. All these small community health insurance companies that people use, they're dying off because they can't compete with Kaiser, they can't compete with Blue Anthem, they can't compete with Blue Cross. It's corporate welfare.
Mr. Cornejo, that's time. Okay, we'll do closing statements. You have a minute 30. Closing statements in the affirmative. Closing statements.
All right. First off, I'd just like to say that I'm glad the Republicans want everyone to have health care, even though they don't act like it. Because they have not proposed an alternative at all. Even at state levels, their alternative is do nothing or let the hospitals just not treat people. Those are the alternatives that they have thus far proposed. They don't have a meaningful alternative. The Republicans in Congress have voted over 50 times in the House to repeal the Affordable Care Act while not doing any other part of their jobs. Yeah, it's a symbolic gesture to please you, but it's not helping the country. And what we need to do is help the country. And that's what the Affordable Care Act is designed to do. It incorporated Republicans in its design from the beginning. I watched from my couch outraged as a concession after concession was made to Republicans to please them, to get them on board. Because they had all these ideas, and Democrats said, that's a good idea, let's incorporate it. And now Republicans are opposed to it. The individual mandate, which they disliked, was a Republican concept of personal responsibility that they advocated before Obama passed it. Okay? So, furthermore, one of the opponents here said that in Europe, Canadians and the English come over here to get health care because they have wait times in England and Europe. My mom's from England, okay, so I'm going to call bullshit on this. Because first of all, she has a condition which has gone untreated for decades because guess what? In the United States, she can't afford to get that treatment. In England, she might have had to wait a few months. She would have gotten it. It's better than an indefinite wait time. So wait time argument is invalid. It is not true. Ask people who live there. Now, furthermore, there's just so many
Mr.
things.
Jones, that is time. Thank you. Our next statement is from Mr. Cornejo.
So you hear a lot of emotional appeal. You hear a lot of criticizing us as, the party that says no. You hear a lot of us, oh, we're surprised they care about healthcare. That's them trying to prevent themselves from actually talking about the facts you mentioned, right? They have no response on the population question I asked. They have no response. They seem, and they talk I mentioned Britain and Canada. You can talk about your mom as much as you want. You can talk about people or whoever it was. You can talk about them all you want. But statistics from economists, from the Federal Reserve, statistics from government organizations talk about that's one of the problems with universal health care is wait times. That's one of the problems. And that's why people come here. Now, I'm not defending the current system at all. What I'm against is corporate welfare. And I mentioned that. You guys had no response to that. You guys did not talk about that. You did not acknowledge that in your statement. 12 companies, that's not going to increase competition. That's going to increase, they're going to raise prices. There's no price measure to control them from raising prices. So the prices are going to increase. You're going to see, it's unsustainable, as I mentioned on the population rates. And then you talk a lot about minorities. You talk about how we don't have health care. Well, we don't. And I agree. I hate that. My family, my mom doesn't have health care. My dad has health care through his employer, which is great. He has a Kaiser plan, which is great for his employer. But stop mentioning minorities like you care so much about us. You don't know what we need. We know what we need. Okay, mi amigo?
Yeah, where'd it go? Anyone see? Sorry. Sorry, one thing.
Can you pass that sheet around? Where's that sheet?
Oh, yeah, anybody else? Yeah, how does a big piece of paper go missing?
Check your pockets.
Hashtag where's the paper?
Oh, I'm gonna take off.
They're trying to stuff us.
They need a break.
Okay. So our next will be our next question is now having to do with corporate taxes. So the United States should reduce corporate taxes. Today, large U.S. corporations report more than $1 trillion in cash or liquid assets. They have the funds to invest in new jobs should they choose to do so. We found no evidence that cutting the tax rate on corporate profits induces firms to create new jobs in the United States. However, several legal loopholes and deductions do discourage job creation in the United States and should be eliminated. This would raise significant revenue and make the tax code fairer. And we begin now with the College of Republicans. Thank you, Mr. Fernando.
I'll speak first again. All right. So we are against individual tax rates. I mean, individual tax breaks. I'm sorry. We believe all corporations, our current corporate tax system is a progressive corporate tax system. The more you make, the higher your higher tax bracket you're in. If you're at the highest tax bracket, it's 35%. Many corporations, and they're probably going to argue this point and completely agree, many corporations don't pay that rate. They pay much lower. They pay around 22%. Corporations like GE pay 0. Verizon, 0. And one of the reasons they pay 0 is because they're big benefactors to the government. They provide a lot of items to the government, and the government wants to tax them 0. So we're against that. We're against giving which is why we asked to change the question to just lowering corporate taxes, because we would both disagree about individual tax breaks. So when speaking about adequate levels of taxation, we must ask for what purpose? Is the purpose to increase government revenue, or is it an abstract question about fairness? This question is important because since the 1970s, the economics profession has come to accept the idea that incentives matter, and that government policy cannot plan successfully while ignoring microeconomic behavior. As the Laffer curve has shown, the tax rate above its revenue maximizing point creates incentives that actually decrease government revenue at higher tax rates. In an open economy perspective, higher tax rates in one country pushes investment into lower taxation countries. The United States has the highest corporate tax rate of 39.1% if you include state corporate taxes. among the most developed nations in the world, known as the Organization for Economic and Cooperation and Development. With the highest corporate tax rate within the developed world, it is no surprise that corporations send money overseas to tax shelters, or that they would rather invest in much friendlier regulatory environments. It is estimated that upward of $2 trillion in profits are just sitting around abroad, unavailable either to shareholders as dividends or to be taxed by the Treasury. The solution, therefore, is not increased corporate taxes, but a decrease in corporate taxes and a simplification of the tax code. This complex tax code allows for many corporations to go without paying any taxes, or the official tax rate. It is estimated that for many companies, as I already stated, at the highest tax bracket, it's somewhere between 22%. It gives them an unfair advantage over other corporations in the same tax bracket. So if you have good lobbyists, and you both make the same amount of profits, if you have the good lobbyists, you're going to pay 22%, and the ones who don't have good lobbyists are going to pay 35%. So we need to close those loopholes. We completely agree. Raising corporate tax rates, however, will do nothing to remove those loopholes, and instead penalize companies that actually pay the 35% tax rate. A solution is to remove the loopholes and instead decrease the highest tax rate to around 28%, which is the weighted average of all of the OECD countries, making us more competitive again. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Granado. Our next debater will be Mr. Mason.
Okay, before I begin, I'd just like to say we're actually going to find some common ground here tonight, guys. Okay, just begin reading off our prepared arguments. Our first argument is that the U.S. should be focusing on closing these loopholes, not reducing corporate taxes. One of the most contentious issues in the political economy recently has been the fact that the U.S. has the highest tax rate of all on corporations in the world, which has spurred countless discussions about the rate at which tax policy should function. We as the Democrats, however, see this as a natural response to the deficit the U.S. has incurred. Higher taxes have been put in place to curb the deficit we have. The crux of the issue lies at the heart of the procedures utilized to collect taxes from corporations, because we simply aren't seeing anywhere close to 35% back from these corporations. Matt Krantz of USA Today reported on February 19, 2014, that among the S&P 500, 58 companies have effective tax rates of 0% or lower when you account for their surplus. The reason for this rests largely on the fact that corporations, be them transnational or domestic, have found ways to circumvent the tax collection procedures that the U.S. government has set in place. Yves Smith, a think tank analyst, wrote on December 4, 2013, in 2012, U.S. corporations reported earning nearly $1.8 trillion in profits. Had they paid the 35% tax rate on those profits, total corporate tax receipts would have been $630 billion rather than the $242 billion they actually paid, and the deficit would have been reduced by nearly a third. The logic here is simple. If you actually close loopholes and you collect taxes at the rate they should be, the deficit will be reduced drastically. Our second argument is that reducing corporate taxes increases the gap of inequality in the U.S. The common notion exists within this country that the higher our GDP is, the happier the country is as well. However, the conservative reforms that have taken control of our economic ideology since the Reagan era have shown quite the opposite. William Domhoff, a political science professor at UCSC, notes a statistic in 2010 that I'm very sure most of you in this room have heard, that the top 1% of our income bracket holds almost 40% of the privately owned wealth in America. The reason why? Because big business owns all of the wealth in America and have no incentives to help the disadvantaged. Zaid Gialani of thinkprogress.org reported that of the 78 senior executives his think tank polled, almost 50% of them openly admitted to outsourcing jobs solely because of the lower operating costs that were there. This is where taxes come in, because at one point, Keynesian economics, otherwise known as big government economics, took hold in the collective economic philosophy. Now that we've cut spending over the last 30 years and rolled back government, the rate at which the poor and disadvantaged suffer have become even worse than before. Reducing the level of inequality by making the same people that created pay some of their profits back is just common sense. And we won't see any trending progress made until we stop listening to the same Republican rhetoric that trickle-down economics, and start investing some of this money back home, where we can make our citizens even happier. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Mason. We will now begin with cross-examination with Mr. Cornejo.
You mentioned.
Wait, don't we get the first question?
Oh, go ahead. Sorry.
Okay, the last topic we argued, you said you're against corporate welfare. How are you not against corporate welfare, or how are you not against corporate welfare in this situation?
Yes, we want to close loopholes. We believe everybody should pay the same money.
But you also think that we should reduce corporate tax rates,
Yes,
which gives corporations more money, which in a way is a form of welfare.
is it not?
It's their own profits. They're not giving them money that people are paying into taxes. That's their own profit. You're reducing what they pay into the system.
But when they end up when they end up creating a higher level of inequality, you think that they should end up deserving that money?
The higher level of inequality you speak of, how are they creating that?
Well, largely corporations that end up getting this amount of money goes into the pockets of the CEOs that own the companies. It doesn't go back into the reinvestment of the laborers of the company. It goes largely into the pockets of the 1%, which is why we iterated that.
Okay, the reason that wealth inequality has increased, and this is by Harvard economists, I forgot their names, I read the study a few weeks ago, it's because our financial system has grown since the 1980s. We have our banks and our system has employed more people who earn higher wages. We have opened up our markets around the world, allowing investors to become more valuable to the economy. Therefore, not just investors, stockbrokers, therefore they're going to be paid.
Is it not reasonable to argue that perhaps these corporations have grown so much because of the low tax rates they've always had?
They've grown so much because now they have a large amount of consumers around the world that they did not have. Consumers in China and India have opened up their markets thanks to development. I have a question.
But you mentioned these markets have opened and then you outsource the jobs to those markets. You don't end up paying American laborers. You don't end up paying us. This is about us.
Do you want to bring those jobs back?
Yes, of course I
No,
want
we
to bring
don't.
those
Our
jobs.
economy has changed. We're not going to go back in time to us working in garment factories. We have to educate our workforce for us to work on innovative things that actually allow us to use our brains, not just our physical labor. And Keynesian economics, all right, it's Keynesian economics from John Maynard Keynes, and he was a liberal.
Time.
So that's consumerism.
Mr. Cornell, time.
Liberal economics.
Okay, so our next debater,
I think it's their side, right? First.
yeah, Mr. Mondo.
All right. How many of you guys heard of Apple? Yeah? All right. How many of you guys know they call it a Dutch sandwich? Crazy term, right? Yeah. All right. So right now, corporations like Apple and GE, who actually got a $3 billion rebate in 2012 on their taxes. You want to know why they're doing weird tax evasion things like the Dutch sandwich, where you take your money, you move it to an offshore account, which then moves through a bunch of European countries and ends up in Ireland, where the tax rate for foreign national corporations isn't the same. It's a really tricky way of holding their money overseas because our tax rates are so high. Apple has $100 billion overseas, so they're not going to bring back here American money that won't go back to America because our rate is at 35%. It's so damn high that they don't want to ever have their money even look at America because they know they're going to lose almost all of it. And it's not going to end, and because of that, the US is never going to benefit from that money at all. So yeah, we're going to completely agree in closing loopholes. Because closing loopholes means more people actually pay. But at the same time, you can get a similar amount of revenue if you actually just lower those rates. That way, we're actually competitive with the rest of the world. They want to actually bring business here because they're not going to get taxed at such a high rate that it's not prohibitive. And the government's actually get some money out of it in the end. Now, when we talk about the competition, we're not competitive right now. I mean, I don't know how you can argue that. Jobs are leaving this country constantly, consistently, going elsewhere. Because because their economies are growing, because they're cheaper, and because their tax rate isn't nearly as high as ours. So I mean, I really don't see this argument. We need to lower the corporate tax rate. Yeah, I know they're getting a lot of money, and they actually should pay into the government. I can't disagree with that. But honestly, you really can't disagree with the fact that our rates are so high, it's become cost prohibitive. Okay, we're at that point. Walter mentioned the Laffer curve. I'm not an economist, but I do believe Laffer curve says that there's a certain point at which you pay your taxes, that is at the maximum percentage. I don't believe 35% happens to be that point in this case, because no one's actually paying it. They're finding ways around it. So let's simplify the tax code, let's get more people actually paying taxes, and then lower the rate they're actually paying these taxes at. And when it comes to their actual numbers, they mentioned 1% of people, or 4% of the income. That's the whole wealth versus income argument. It's a whole different thing, but then you want to mention corporations in there. And those are and corporations may be people, but those are not the people they were talking about. So let's get our facts straight here as well. When you're talking about corporations versus people versus the amount of income and wealth they have, the differences across all four of those things. Because they're all four very different things. So I'll close this by simply saying, let's lower to the 25 to 28% bracket. Because that is well supported to be a range that corporations will be willing to pay. It's not discouraging. And let's make sure that we can close those loopholes. That's why we changed the question in the first place. We actually would have agreed to the Democrats on every single point on that. Because we do want to see those loopholes go away. It's more fair if we're on an even playing field for paying the actual taxes. That way the government gets the money, and the people win by having overseas money come back here and be invested in America. Because companies want to invest this money. They can't though, because our economy is so shaky that investments are very hard to make right now, to make any money off of. And that's the point of business right there.
debater from the Young Democrats will be Mr. Jones.
Hello, thank you. All right, so I'll just start with, first of all, we agree with closing loopholes. It's hard to generalize entirely because there are loopholes that probably exist for legitimate reasons, but I think we can all agree that most of them are just a product of corruption in our government, right? They're pretty bad and pretty rampant. However, I don't know in what reality it's okay to reward bad behavior on a consistent basis. And when you're talking about tax evasion, that's what you're talking about. It's corporations behaving badly. They're doing something that is not legal. They're avoiding taxes. And it's not, first of all, it's not ethical, but second of all, it's not smart because you're rewarding them for doing this. And as long as the cost for them to shuttle their income off to other countries and to avoid taxes, as long as that cost for them is less than the tax rate, they're not going to pay it. So if the tax rate's 28% and they only have to pay 4% to get their money hidden away, they're going to pay the 4% to get their money hidden away. They don't owe loyalty to the United States. They're not beholden to us. And as long as they can get away with not paying taxes, they're going to get away with not paying taxes. So, you know, I'm not sure entirely how the number of 28% comes about. If all companies paid 28%, that'd probably be a good thing. But we also have a conversation here about flat tax versus progressive tax. And the reason, oh, okay, you mentioned progressive taxes earlier in your argument.
There's different tax brackets. We're talking about
okay, so you want to maintain
a flat 35 rate.
Okay, pardon me. But yeah, so, but anyway, our core contention, I mean, yeah, we agree loopholes should be lowered and removed. But lowering the tax bracket just rewards that bad behavior. There's no reason that it has to be done, and there's already legislation pending in the Senate that's going to punish companies that do send their money offshore. And so I think it would be better, you know, if you want to talk about, in any sense, the strength of the American economy or the American government being respectable, for it to punish lawbreakers and to actually get them to do what the law currently says they should, than to just reward them for breaking the law and say, yeah, we'll lower your taxes to whatever you want. Like, that's not how the American government should function. That's not how you run an economy. And that's not the right thing to do. And now, our opponents over here already mentioned, and they're not really so much opponents in this, but the Republicans in this already mentioned that a lot of these companies are sitting on a lot of wealth, but they're not reinvesting into the United States. And that's a bad thing, because money that isn't moving isn't doing anything. So all that profit that they have that is stored, all that money they have that is stored offshores, it's not generating anything for anyone but their stockholders, right? And that is contributing to income inequality and to wealth inequality. And you know, these taxes are necessary so that we can reinvest that money back here. And if we can get the full 35%, that's better than getting 28%, because we're going to have more money that we can spend making our economy stronger so that more companies want to invest in this country. And on the bright side, if you look at government investment in our country, it's already increasing.
Examination.
Now,
No cross-examination.
yeah. All right, I guess you lose the question now. All right, so we've talked a lot about basically getting people to actually pay the system and rewarding bad behavior. Now, what do you think is worse? Rewarding what you see as bad behavior, or getting people actually in the system paying? Because you call it bad behavior, I'm talking about getting them to actually pay.
Well, I find it funny that the Republicans are willing to forgive companies and get them into the system without punishing them, but aren't willing to do the same thing for a lot of other groups that have also been excluded from systems, right? So if you got like people who are in jail for drugs, right? A lot of Republicans, maybe not you guys,
How is this
oppose getting them back
the
in.
topic though? We're trying to get American corporations' money back in America, paying to actual rates. That's fine. I can agree with that.
But there's multiple ways to do that, and you don't have
like a cash repatriation program. We've done that before.
Yeah,
corporations loved it. Got the money back over here. Look, they're not breaking the law by holding their money overseas necessarily. They're actually finding legal ways to cheat the tax system. It's not right, but it's legal. They
but
can
there's
do it. They
legislation
found a way
pending to make that illegal, and why not support that? So, yeah,
we're going to make something they do overseas illegal because it's too for them to actually invest here. That makes sense. Let's give them a way to actually pull the money back to the United States instead of saying, "Hey, you put your money overseas. We don't like that. We're gonna find even more here."
They're only going to bring it back as long as it's profitable for them to do so.
Let's make it profitable for them then. Exactly.
But if it's more profitable,
I think we can agree here on that.
Yeah, but that's through incentives and punishments. You're just saying give them what they want and they'll come back.
Because they're right. They need money to be able to operate and make profits. Profits mean good, mean your investors are happy, it means high stock prices. High stock prices mean your company's doing well. your company doing well can only be better for our economy. Let's bring the money back to the United States.
All
Let's
right.
make sure they can actually
All
pay
right,
these
but I'll
rates.
stop you there. How does lowering the rate and closing all the loopholes, supposedly through some magic bill that hasn't been conceived of yet, how does that actually stop them from shifting their money up
We
over?
make it competitive, make them want to invest here.
How? That you don't
Because
just do that
the
by
rates are
lowering
lower
taxes
than the
to a
rest of
flat
Europe.
rate.
We make
You
the rates
provide
lower than theirs,
incentives
they're
and
going to
you
keep their
provide.
money here.
That's why
That's how
loopholes
investing
exist.
works.
Is to well, the reason loopholes tend to exist is because they're
It's time.
designed to incentivize things.
That's
We're going to incentivize
Mr.
them.
Mondo? Alright, thank you. Our next debater from the College Republicans is going to be Mr. Lewis.
Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and talk about some of the points that they made earlier, and then reiterate the points that we've made throughout this debate. So, we talk about the amount of jobs going overseas. We both agree that this is a trend that is happening. You can't deny it. It's a result of globalization because all the markets have been opened up. We're trading with each other. It's not a bad thing. That's great. That all the people of the world are able to trade with one another, we're able to interact with one another, able to share ideas, share goods. But the thing is that taxation, the high taxation we have in this country, for people who do play by the rules, is disincentivizing them from bringing high-skilled jobs to America. High-skilled jobs, it's a greater incentive to bring high-skilled jobs for people like us who have degrees, who are educated. They take those jobs to Europe because you know what? Europe is more friendly to corporations. And the thing is that we have the high skill here. We definitely do in a lot of areas where states that actually do incentivize corporations to be profitable, like Texas. You see a high number of high-skilled jobs. For example, in San Antonio, where the mayor of San Antonio, Julian Castro, who we'll be bringing, shameless plug, he's a Democrat, and he's incentivizing high-level tech jobs. And the reason the way he's doing it is through taxes, through friendly taxes that allow corporations to operate and to provide good, high-level jobs to Americans. And that's great. I think that that's the type of approach we should be taking to taxation. We should be trying to get high-level jobs. I really don't want the crappy job that is being worked on overseas in a third world country. I really don't. I think I deserve better. I have a bachelor's degree. I think I should deserve a better job. And I think that the Democrats kind of wanted to bring those jobs back. Like, seriously, like, does anyone really want to work those? And the thing is those type of jobs are actually good for the people overseas because they can actually increase their wealth, increase their income, and actually move towards development. And I think that's something that we need to acknowledge, that we need to create smart incentives here to encourage high-level job creation. And I think that this current system doesn't do that. So to reiterate, what we're proposing is close loopholes, which we both agree on, which is awesome, and reduce the taxes to 28%. And by doing so, we believe that we can incentivize investment and spending within the United States. Investment and spending that occurs in some states like Texas, but does not occur all throughout the United States because we are not incentivizing good, smart ideas, good, smart jobs. So that's all I have to say.
Next debater from the Young Democrats will be
Okay, so you guys have proposed lowering the tax rate to 28%. However, in the information that we have provided, many companies pay less than that right now and still have jobs overseas. So that's not really a fair incentive, 28%. The average right now is 12% that companies actually pay in taxes. So if they're already paying 12%, if we close the loopholes and make it go up to 28%, what makes you think that that's going to automatically make them come back? What we need to do is close the loopholes and keep them honest and tax them the way that they should be taxed. And like the information we presented earlier from Zaid Jilani, 50% of the polled executives openly admitted to outsourcing jobs solely because of reduction in operation costs. It's cheaper to go to other countries than it is to come here. That's true. Like, we can't compete with that. We can't compete with third world labor. That's really cheap. But what we have to do is we have to keep the money that is made by corporations in America. And by closing the tax holes, or closing the corporate loopholes, and by keeping it at 35%, we will be able to do that. So like I said, just the main point is basically that companies who are already paying less than 28% are still abroad. That's not going to change. So by going to 28%, it's not going to change anything.
Mr. Anderson. We will now begin with the grand cross-examination.
So, how would lowering the tax rate to 28% bring anyone back whatsoever? Well, couldn't we achieve that through the mechanism that we both agree on, closing corporate tax loopholes?
Zach, I agree. Close the tax loopholes, they have to pay, but they still have incentive to go overseas. Now, you guys keep saying that 12%, okay, so you keep saying that some corporations are paying 12%. Well,
Right.
what tax bracket do those corporations belong to?
I can't tell you that off the top.
Do you know what tax brackets are?
That's the average across the corporate tax pool. So there's some corporations at the top bracket who are paying zero in taxes. They're getting actively subsidized.
Exactly.
Some
Those
are
are
paying
among the
more.
Fortune
So it's
500 companies,
yeah.
some of the top earners in the world.
Because we have
And
about
that's the overall average of all of them. So
we
it's
have
not
about
companies
5
in one
tax
particular
brackets.
bracket.
We do have a progressive
Yes,
tax.
we do.
Okay, so we have about 5 different tax brackets. Another point I was going to make about that was, so the reason we keep saying the number is 28% in the highest tax brackets, because that's the average of all developed countries. That's what all developed countries have. So we want to compete with them in that sense. By closing loopholes, because we could completely agree with that.
Do you think it would be feasible in Congress, as it is today, to pass something that just closes loopholes with the issue of the tax rate being up for negotiation later? Do you think they could do that on its own? Or does it have to be both? And why does it have to be both? Why can't it be one and then the other?
It's got to be both, because when you're closing loopholes, you're doing something the corporations don't want. The loopholes are actually benefiting them right now. So when you take away something, you got to throw them a bone also. Okay? It's just, if you're taking away something that's helping them, you got to give them another way to help them out here. And basically, closing the tax loopholes to make sure they'll pay more here. We got to bring the money back somehow.
Okay.
We'll bring the money back by making that
Furthermore,
similar
do you
rate to
believe
here.
it's possible for our Congress to ever close loopholes? Like,
Yes,
period.
I actually do think it's possible. But you got to be able to pass it with something else that'll work with them.
That
And
is
that's where Congress is.
That's time, Mr. Monte. So, our final statement?
I'll go on first.
Affirmative. Dispense.
Okay, so they seem to think, at least some of them, not all of them, that we can stop economic forces. You know, we are in a globalized world, right? We have new markets coming all around the world. The reason markets have opened up in China, in India, in Brazil, the BRICS, you know, these big countries, because they've opened up their markets and they have developed. Their living standards have increased. People have been able to purchase more goods and they're buying them from us. The reason that's happening is because we are working together. We are trading with each other, right? So yes, there are people working in sweatshops. That's horrible by our standards, right? We went to that same stage of development in the United States in the 1800s. And we don't want those jobs here anymore, because we have outgrown that in terms of our skill level. You know, they're using an argument that some Republicans use, right? Illegal immigrants are taking our jobs. Yeah. No, they're not, because you know what? American workers are high-skilled workers, and illegal immigrants are taking American workers' jobs because illegal immigrants are very low-skilled workers, and that it's in a sense where if you use that same argument, you in a sense agreeing with Republicans who think that way. You're saying that the American workforce is competing with really low-skilled labor in terms of those jobs. Well, the American labor force, however, is becoming more skilled every year, every decade. We are becoming more a higher service sector, and we are becoming more dependent on trade and knowledge, not just labor. So don't fight the economic forces. Let's work together for a higher development and higher economic growth there.
That's a good answer. Thank you.
All right. Yeah, give me a sec here. Let's see. So I think fundamentally we pretty much agree on loopholes. There's examples where I'm not sure I agree on that, but when it comes down to it, they're arguing that the jobs that are gone, and this is sort of a different argument from the original one, but they're making the argument that the jobs that are gone, it's a good thing they're gone, and they shouldn't be brought back because they were horrible sweatshop labor. And besides, with those jobs came labor unions, and labor unions don't vote for Republicans. So, yeah. And I can totally see why they'd argue that. That's very good electoral policy.
Emotional appeal.
No, it's anyway. So, the thing is, though, a lot of countries can channel economic forces. So that's sort of, I mean, take Germany, for example. They have a very high-tech sector of industry, right? And they incentivize that. And so you can't say that our jobs all have to be service sector or something like that. We could have an economy like Germany's. So industrial jobs are not themselves inherently inferior. They don't have to be sweatshop labor. It's not a good thing that they are. The fact that they're going to other countries is a result of our economic policy. And if we wanted them back, we could have them back. And I think the Americans who are unemployed in this country would kind of appreciate to have them back. Now, we still have a lot of very unpleasant jobs in this country that people still don't want to do. We have the whole meatpacking industry, which is horrific. Like, no one should want to work there, right? Largely because the unions that used to make that a good job are gone now. But, you know, these jobs are not inherently bad. It's the way they're managed that makes them either positive or negative.
So, Mr. Jones, thank you. So that signals the end of the college Republicans versus the Young Democrats debate. I'm sure Andrew's going to have some closing words, but let's give him a round of applause again.
Wow, what an extremely powerful debate, right? I've never seen such a small group of 6 people been so vicious at it. But I just want to leave this off with one hit. And it's that a debate is not about policy. It is about, it's impossible to state a coherent policy in 3 minutes, right? Debates test one thing, and that's the ability to quickly respond to questions numbing complexity that are impossible to answer in the time available. With that, I believe all 6 debaters tonight clearly have mastered the art of persuasion. And ending that, thank you all who came tonight, and see you all next year.
It's so much fun. I didn't know I'd go ahead and start. I thought you went.
Oh, that's yours. God damn it.
No, I didn't know that was good. But then on the other one, I was like, am I talking?
Guys, you guys did really great.
Thanks.
Like this.